in which the Communist Party of China exerts either influence or perhaps in other cases interference.
And the other, are you able to comment on the other ways?
Chinese police stations are a perfect example of something that's been in the news recently that our friend from the block asked about earlier today.
Good. And of course, and they often, the United Front often operates through proxies, we've learned. You agree that that's correct?
Yes.
And I think the words you used to describe foreign interference in your examination in chief were covert, coercive, deceptive. And so would it surprise you if you were told that the United Front might funnel funds to Chinese proxies in Canada?
I am wary of getting into too much of what I know in an open forum here, but I think there's been evidence submitted along the lines of that.
Okay, and you're aware that CSIS has confirmed that the United Front uses proxies to disinvite or deplatform regime opponents from invitations to important community events. I would encourage you to go directly to the source of these reports and allegations. I can say that, yes, I am kept very, very highly briefed on various ways of interference. I'm not always sure which ones I can talk about that I know about that others may not know about, but if you're talking about public record things, then it's good that you're putting them into the record. Sure, and so as a politician, of course, part of some of the rituals of Canadian political life involve attending events hosted by different ethnic communities that are potentially quite significant. So Vaisakhi would be one I'm sure that you might be familiar with.
Yes.
And so there is a certain significance then to having been invited for many years to an event and then suddenly disinvited in a public way. That would be designed to send a message. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think publicly disinviting someone as wrong as it would be might fall into the category of influence rather than interference. If a diplomat is hosting an event that the Chinese government is behind or through with proxies, it's a fairly open and visible way, and perhaps meant to be open and visible, to exclude an individual. That sounds like as wrong or unfortunate, or much as we might disagree with it, it sounds like something that is not covert or surreptitious, but more very direct disapproval.
But if it's a community event organized by a Canadian organization,
I think we're getting into hypotheticals here, but I understand your point that it is unfortunate that China in general tries to silence critics of its regime, including high-profile members of parliament.
Okay, so a couple of concluding questions, if I may, Prime Minister. So the GAC panel testified that if the People's Republic of China, or for that matter any other foreign state, were engaged in foreign interference in Canada, it would violate international law. Do you have any reason to disagree with that evidence?
No, I am. Yes, the foreign interference is violation of Canadian law and international law.
And you'd agree then it's a violation of Canadian sovereignty?
Yes.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Jarman, representing a Renault Tool.
Thank you, Prime Minister, or thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, my name is Tom Jarman, I represent Aaron O'Toole. Just building on a question that my colleague was asking, Mr. O'Toole, similar to Ms. Kwan, has also received a defensive briefing from CSIS. And was that done with the permission or direction of your office?
Again, it is not something that CSIS needs to get permission from the Prime Minister's office to do. But in this case, we certainly encouraged it.
Yeah. And has your office given general direction that when MPs come under this sort of, I guess, scrutiny or attack, that they should be made aware of that?
That is, in general, our approach on things, yes.
But yet, has your office given direction to that effect?
It is not to us to direct CSIS on what threat reduction or defensive briefings it gives or doesn't give, but certainly our posture has been one of encouraging CSIS to keep all parliamentarians informed and aware of not just threats against them, but of issues of foreign interference.
Okay, thank you. I guess if I could go to CAN 4495. And this is a document that supposedly relates to a briefing which was intended to occur sometime in late February of 2023. It was prepared by CSIS. Commission counsel shown it to you, and I believe you also saw it during your witness interview. If you could scroll down to the third page. A little further, please. Thank you very much. Oops, back up, please. Thank you. So I understand from your witness interview that you were not advised of these events concurrent to them happening in the election in 2021. But I would ask, after February 21st of 2023, have you ever been briefed by either CSIS or the NSIA with respect to conclusions similar to this, that there were observed online media activities aimed at discouraging Canadians, particularly Chinese heritage, from supporting the Conservative Party of Canada leader Aaron O'Toole, and particularly Steveston, Richmond East, Kenny Chu? The timing of the efforts to align with Conservative polling improvements, similarities in language with articles published by the PRC state media, and the partnership agreements between these Canada-based outlets and PRC entities all suggest that these efforts were orchestrated or directed by the PRC.
I think on this, I'd like to turn to the summary prepared of evidence on this one. I believe
I think it's at 66, paragraph 49.
Sorry, I'm talking about the intelligence summaries, not the interview summaries. The prepared summaries. Redactors.
Madam Commissioner, I think the Prime Minister is referring to the multi-source topical summary.
That one. Topical summaries, yes. She or she.
I believe it's number 4, if that assists, dot 4.
We just scroll
Yes,
down.
I have that one.
page. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's it.
So that's a topical summary, but going back to my question, which was, has any official, either the NSIA or the director of CSIS or anyone on your staff, briefed you with respect to the conclusions that were in CAN 4495?
And just to be fair to the witness, perhaps he could be allowed to look at those conclusions one by one rather than
Sure.
in a mass.
Well, possibly you can go back to CAN 4495 then, please.
Yes, I have the summary, so if we can go back on the page to the document you brought up.
Thank you. Scroll down, thank you. Further. And just a little bit further, thank you. So the overall statement is observed online and media activities aimed at discouraging Canadians, particularly of Chinese heritage, from supporting Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole, and particularly Stevenson and Richmond East candidate Kenny Jew.
Yeah, what I would go to is the bottom of that, the last line in the second paragraph there, and refer to the general summary there, point 6, that says, no PRC state direction of the incident was detected or reported.
Yes, I realize that's what that document says. My question is, did anyone brief you with respect to those allegations that are in CAN 4495? And your answer is no, that's fine.
First of all, these are briefing notes that I never saw. These are briefings for a briefer who then gave a briefing that, as we've seen, may or may not have included all of these things. I am and was, however, aware of the elements in the summary that talked about whether it's following the publication of the article in the Hill Times. There was a number of different media organizations that picked up and ran with those things. But again, getting to the bottom line that no Chinese state direction of the incident was detected or reported.
Thank you. And I'd like to turn now to COM 008, which is the cabinet directive from 2021 with respect to their critical election incident public protocol. And this is the standing directive right now. It is, unlike 2019, this is an ongoing thing. Is that correct?
Yes, this is the existing directive now, yes.
And we've heard from various witnesses, Madame Drouin, who said that the threshold for intervention by the panel of 5 would either be high or very high, were the words she used. Minister Gould used observe with certainty, and Minister LeBlanc used the high threshold as well. Is that consistent with your understanding of how the directive is meant to apply?
The directive is meant to apply and the panel is meant to kick in when there are threats to Canada being able to hold a free and fair election. That must necessarily be a significantly high threshold because just the act of engaging for the panel could itself have an impact on the unfolding of the election. So the expertise and the experience and the professional judgment of the people on the panel is what we lean on significantly for whether and how they intervene. I will highlight that not every intervention by the P5 would be to convene a supper hour press conference to tell Canadians about something in the middle of an election campaign. It could involve, as it has, apprising different parties of concerns. It could involve asking or working with a social media giant to take down a particular piece of misinformation. Like, there are different things that would have different thresholds in terms of what is required to do to ensure that the election remains free and fair for Canadians.
Possibly, can we scroll down in the directive itself, please? And into 5. There we are, the process. Actually, I'm sorry, I have to go back up again. So they say, paragraph 3, please. You say, Minister, or Prime Minister rather, that this can be engaged by threats. The panel of 5 has testified that it must be an event that has occurred which affects a free and fair election, at which they would give notice to Canadians. Is your evidence that the panel can act on perceived threat as opposed to an event?
I'd ask you actually to scroll down to, go to 4.0 or, no, next one, 5.0.
There we go. Lays out a process through which Canadians would be notified of an incident that threatens Canada's ability to have a free and fair election should notification be necessary. I suppose an incident could be an event, but I think if there is an imminent threat to Canada's ability to have free and fair election, I have no doubt that the panel would engage with that, whether or not the incident or event had happened or was just imminently about to happen.
And just one last question, please, Commissioner. And that threat
Short
could
one.
crystallize at the general election level, at the riding level, or indeed among a diaspora community level that's spread out over across several ridings.
Sorry, what's your question?
That threat could crystallize
Could, yes.
at either the general election level, an individual riding level, or among a broader community that's spread out over several ridings.
Yes, as long as it threatens Canada's ability to have a free and fair election, either at the riding level or in the aggregate general election, which is just the sum of 338 individual riding elections.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Mr. De Luca, acting on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Could I have, just give me a moment, could I have TRN 6 called up, please? And while that's being called up, Mr. Prime Minister, in preparation for your testimony here today, have you been aware that MP Han Dong confirmed under oath at this inquiry that he spoke to PRC officials on multiple occasions about the two Michaels while they were held in captivity in China?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And am I correct that the two Michaels had been taken into custody and detained in China commencing in December 2018 until they were released at the end of September 2021?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the detention of the two Michaels was a very high profile and very sensitive matter, both in Canada and abroad?
It was certainly very high profile, and it was a detention that caused us to mobilize broadly. It was certainly a very difficult experience for the two Michaels and their families, but it was also something that mobilized an awful lot of not just Canadians, but our partners around the world.
Thank you. We've heard evidence and seen evidence in this inquiry that at least one of the conversations between Mr. Dong and the PRC General Consul General in Toronto was intercepted and monitored, that it touched upon the two Michaels in some respect, and that at least a summary of the intercepted conversation exists. And I have a couple of questions for you regarding this intercepted conversation.
Just before my friend does, I'm not sure whether the details the assertion he's making is one that can be found in the public record, but I'm happy to hear from him about that. I would urge him to refer to the summary, the topical summary on this issue.
I'm going to come to the topical summary, but if I could ask the Prime Minister generally, when were you first made aware that Mr. Dong had been having conversations with the PRC Consul General regarding the two Michaels?
I can't recall offhand at what point that was.
Do you remember what year, sir?
Perhaps there's documents that refer to the meeting that I can talk about publicly, the various briefings that I've had when these allegations came out. I believe this was the source, this was a matter disclosed in the leaks in the fall of 2022, and it was only subsequent to those leaks that I became aware of those conversations. So it would have been late in 2022.
You don't believe you were made aware of any such conversations prior to then?
No.
And could I ask that can some two be called up, please? And I believe Ms. Chowdhury took you through this document to some extent earlier. This is a summary of intelligence held by CSIS and the intelligence agencies relating to Han Dong and his communications with the People's Republic of China. Relating to the two Michaels, and I take it from your answers earlier, you reviewed this document in preparation for your testimony here today?
Yes.
And there's a summary of 5 points relating to this intelligence. Can you confirm, and I think you may have, that aside from your review of this particular document in preparation for today, you have received intelligence briefings and information that is reflected in each of these 5 points?
I have 6 points on mine.
I may have misspoken. You're correct, quite correct. 6 points.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Can I turn your attention to point 4? Perhaps you can review that. And while you are, the second sentence says, MP Dong expressed the view that even if the PRC released the two Michaels at that moment, opposition parties would view the PRC's action as an affirmation of the effectiveness of a hardline Canadian approach to the PRC. See that?
Yes.
When were you first made aware of MP Dong expressing this view?
As I said, this was subsequent to leaks. But let me also just say that it's aware of information alleging that MP Dong expressed this view. As has been previously stated, there have been significant questions around both translation and summary of the actual exchange that, I don't think I need to read the first page filled with caveats around incomplete, single-sourced, varying degrees of reliability, not necessarily indicating corroboration or reliability of sources. So there's a lot of uncertainty around even the things that we're saying in the that we're seeing in the summaries.
Can I ask you, Prime Minister, have you personally reviewed that summary?
This summary?
No, the summary of the intercepted conversation.
Madam Commissioner, I'm concerned that we're getting into a sensitive area. I'm frankly not sure. I'm not sure.
I can say yes to that, though. Yes, I have personally done that. But there's not much more I can say about it.
That's fine, thank you. Can we call up COM 118, which is the Special Rapporteur's first report that was produced or dated May 23, 2023?
COM 118?
Yes.
Just a minute.
And I'd like to go to page 26, small Roman numeral 8. There's an analysis of a piece of reporting that Han Dong advised the PRC consulate to extend the detention of the two Michaels, Global News, March 22, 2023. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and immediately below that, Mr. Johnston comments on how there has been considerable media attention about an alleged transcript of this conversation. You see that?
Yes.
And he then says, I have reviewed the same intelligence report that was provided to the Prime Minister relating to this allegation, which I am advised is the only intelligence that speaks to this issue. I can report the following, and we're going to come to the following. My question now, though, is, Mr. Johnson tells us that he reviewed the same intelligence report that you did, and that this is the only report that exists that speaks to this issue. So my question for you is the following. Is the intelligence report that Mr. Johnson is referring to there CAN-SUM 002 that we just looked at, or is it something else?
I'm not sure the witness can answer that in this setting.
So we'll note the question.
Okay. And are there other reports that, for now we'll go with written reports, either hard copy or electronic, that you're aware of that perhaps were not shared with Mr. Johnson that might relate to precisely what was or wasn't said between Mr. Dong and the PRC official?
I'm not certain I can answer that question
For the same reasons?
for reasons of security and confidentiality.
Thank you.
National security.
Thank you. Have those reports, if there are any such reports, have they been provided to the present commission?
Again, I'm not sure I cannot confirm or infirm the existence of any other reports that I cannot speak to here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson then gives his assessment of that particular allegation as follows. He says, the allegation is false. Mr. Dong discussed the two Michaels with a PRC official, but did not suggest to the official that the PRC extend their detention. The allegation that he did make that suggestion has had a very adverse effect. Do you agree with that assessment, sir?
Yes, we know that the media reports and the allegations made in rather a spectacular fashion about Mr. Dong were false.
Okay, but would you
In
agree
regards
with
to what he said or didn't say about the two Michaels?
Okay, would you agree with me, sir, that all that Mr. Johnson was commenting on was what is contained in that heading, that particular allegation? Mr. Johnson didn't comment one way or the other about whether what else Mr. Dong might have said to the PRC counsel, read the two Michaels, was correct. So, for example, in Can Samo 2, the conversation is stated slightly differently.
I'm not sure the witness can comment on what Mr. Johnson was or was not commenting on.
Mr. Prime Minister, I have very many more questions, as you might imagine, but I simply don't have the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. De Luca. Counsel for Anne Dong.
Thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, I'm Mark Pauley, and as you heard, I represent Han Dong. I'm going to start with the same issue that Mr. De Luca finished with, and that is the allegations that were made in the newspaper, in Global at least, relating to the two Michaels. And we, as you know, we heard yesterday from Mr. Clow, among others, and Mr. Clow told us about how after the leaks came out, there were discussions about what to do, how to respond, whether there could be any response. And in particular, he said there were a number of discussions about how to get the truth out that the story was wrong. And he explained that up until yesterday, he was not able to say that publicly. Are you able to, first of all, tell us, did you have conversations like that as well about whether there was anything the government could do, whether anything you could do?
Well, further, what we actually did was engage the special rapporteur who had the opportunity to go through the evidence and state quite categorically that the allegations were false. And we felt that having the special rapporteur able to engage on that and qualify those allegations as false was perhaps more reassuring to concerned Canadians than having officials of the same, or the elected officials of the same party as Mr. Dong categorizing that the same way.
And so does that, well, aside from ultimately making that decision, did you, like Mr. Clow, have discussions about whether there was anything that could be released before that, like immediately to respond?
There were many discussions following the leaks on
this issue, but on a number of the issues that were leaking, as we highlighted and attempted to highlight a few times in the media. There were clear falsehoods and inaccuracies in the media reporting, but the challenge of protecting national security meant that we were very much limited in our ability to contradict the false allegations being made by the leaker.
And that difficulty you're describing, although we've heard, as I say, Mr. Clow talk about finally being able to say something publicly yesterday, you're speaking about it today to some extent. But I take it that same tension continues, that there's only so much, as we can see, that you're able to say.
But, given, as Mr. Clow pointed out yesterday, we are now in a position to express and to repeat that the way it was characterized in the media was wrong.
Okay. So let me turn to buses, the ongoing discussion about buses. We heard about you being briefed by Mr. Broadhurst in September 2019, and you talked about him flagging concerns and describing this scenario of students being brought to Don Valley North nomination meeting. And you asked whether the intelligence agency understood this thing that busing people to nomination meetings is standard, or I think you said regular earlier. Is that right?
Yes.
And
It will be your last question.
thank you. And you, sorry, let me make sure. And you raised the issue of whether the intelligence agency understood this basic issue that someone like you who knows politics and nomination campaigns knows. And did you figure out an answer to that, whether the people at the agency who were reporting this had that context?
Oh, certainly. Listen, our intelligence agencies, even though they don't organize nomination meetings themselves as political parties do, regularly turn to experts and learn about the things that they don't know about when they need to. So I am very confident that our intelligence agencies now know a lot more about the unfolding of nominations, which is important because they need to be able to ensure that those nominations, like all electoral events, are decided by the residents and indeed by ensuring that our democratic processes are free and fair and absent interference by foreign actors.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Human Rights Coalition.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Teach, and as the Commissioner stated, I'm representing the Human Rights Coalition. I understand, Mr. Prime Minister, that you have a lot of confidence in your NSIA's ability to receive information from the national security agencies. But I want to ask about your level of confidence in the agency's abilities to receive information from those most vulnerable, namely members of targeted diaspora communities. So let me just start with this. Were you aware, Mr. Prime Minister, that the RCMP's National Security Information Network is only available in English and French?
I was not.
Were you aware that the CSE's online reporting tool, as well as CSIS's reporting tool, and the OCCE's complaints form on the website are also available in only English and French?
But I am also aware that all those agencies use in language individuals who are able to reach into and engage with communities. But I take your word for it that the online forms are only in English and French.
I appreciate that. And we also heard on March 27th with the diaspora panel, that was the first day of these hearings, that community members oftentimes don't feel empowered to reach out to the agencies. They feel that they won't be heard. They feel it's a waste of time for whatever reason. Given these limitations, how can you expect the agencies themselves to really know, and therefore how can you expect the NSAA to really know if coercion, harassment, or intimidation of diaspora community members is happening, including in the context of elections?
This is certainly a challenge, and it is something that we've been working on over the past years to try and improve and increase not just the diversity within our various agencies, but also the ability of those agencies to reach into people who are often most vulnerable to interference, particularly in diaspora communities, but also at the same time, often with good reason, most suspicious of authorities and enforcement agencies that have not always treated them fairly in the past.
Thank you. Given these limitations, does this plant even a seed of doubt in your mind in terms of the integrity of the 2019 and 2021 general elections?
I think those are two different things. The challenge of any democracy is ensuring that people who perhaps disagree with the outcome of a given election still have faith that that is indeed the will of the people, the will of citizens. And that's where having a panel in place, both in 2019 and 2021, that could say that they have determined or they've concluded that the election was free and fair is a really important step. Now, nobody can say that about the 2015 election, for example, or elections before, because those panels didn't exist. At the same time, what we learned from the 2019 election was applied to the 2021 election and will continue to be applied and expanded and become more, perhaps more sensitive or alert to various vulnerabilities that are more difficult to go into, particularly when you talk about racialized or marginalized communities. So there is more to do, but I do have confidence in the ability of our intelligence agencies and our panel to have drawn the conclusion that the elections in 2019 and in 2021 were indeed free and fair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doody for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Or, yes. No, it's the Sikh Coalition, I'm sorry. You'll be next.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Trudeau. My name is Prabjot Singh. I'm appearing on behalf of the Sikh Coalition. So I don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to start by asking whether you would agree that your government missed key opportunities to hold India to account for its interference in Canada, and to be more specific, so we can narrow down a concise answer, that there were attempts made by the government to minimize the threat that India posed throughout this relevant period, and actually tried to hide the severity of the threat from Canadians. Would you agree with that assessment?
No.
Mr. Operator, if we can bring up COM 155. So, Mr. Trudeau, this is a copy of the 2019 annual report of the NSI COP, which you mentioned was a body created by your government in the hopes of creating some oversight and transparency on security and intelligence issues. Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 73 of the PDF. So as you know, this report deals with concerns about foreign interference. Is that 73 of the PDF? Or, yeah, 55 of the actual document. And so this is a section that deals with foreign interference specifically. And if we can continue to scroll down until 79, please. You can go a little bit faster. And stop right there, if you can hold for a second, if you scroll up, please. So there is mention specifically of foreign interference by the People's Republic of China, and continue scrolling. There's mention of the Russian Federation, and if we can pause right there, and it specifically says other states engaged in foreign interference, and if you continue scrolling, that entire section has been redacted. And Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 108 of the PDF. And if you continue scrolling until 113, you see these are instances of Canada's response to foreign interference in relation to China. And then it goes into instances of a response to Russian interference. And if we scroll down, and this entire section again is redacted. So Mr. Trudeau, I'm going to suggest that the redacted sections of this report outline details of Indian electoral interference and coercive activities against the Sikh community, as well as outlining governmental failures in combating this specific threat. And so I understand that you may not be able to address this in a public setting for national security reasons. And if that's the case, you can indicate that to the commissioner. So can you confirm that that is the substance that's been redacted in this report?
Obviously, in a public setting, I can't speak to redactions made for national security, but I will say that the principle that anyone who comes to Canada from anywhere in the world has all the rights of a Canadian to be free from extortion, coercion, interference from a country that they left behind. And how we have stood up for Canadians, including in the very serious case that I brought forward to Parliament of the killing of Nijar, demonstrates our government's commitment to defending the rights and freedoms of Canadians, for whom, which are the reasons for which so many people crossed oceans and continents to come live in this country and build this country. And the suggestion that we haven't and we won't do everything we can to defend Canadian rules and values and defend Canadians from foreign interference is simply misplaced.
And so I take your point there, and I have very limited time, but I do want to confirm that it was you that approved the redactions in this report. Is that correct? Based on suggestions from public servants that you received.
Redactions are made by professional public servants, and we sign off on them, but we do not modify them.
But you do have the authority, the ultimate approval, and you do have the possibility to push back against excessive redactions.
Redactions are made by professional public servants, not by the political wing.
And does the Prime Minister have the authority to push back on the suggestions that are made in cases where there may be excessive redactions? That
gets into the entire question of declassification of information, and in the American system, the president can, declassify in ways that are not replicated in our system here in Canada.
So just very simply, I have one last question I want to ask after this. Does the Prime Minister have the authority and the ability to push back against those suggestions when there's excessive redaction?
The Prime Minister has an ability to engage in discussions and ask for reasons. But like I said, as Prime Minister and as a government, our habit and our approach has always been to allow the professional public service to make determinations around what needs to be redacted in the name of national security and confidentiality.
Madam Commissioner, I have one final question, if that's okay.
Very quick.
Sure. I think you would agree that the lack of meaningful steps to expose and stop foreign interference activities when they first arise, including deliberate actions to redact any failures that may have been included in the NSI COP report, could play a role in India's increasingly aggressive interference and repression activities over this period. So that would be a consequence of failing to act effectively and failing to bring the threat of Indian foreign interference to Canadians' attention earlier. Is that correct?
I think that's certainly a question one needs to ask of the previous Conservative government that was known for its very cozy relationship with the current Indian government, whereas our government has always stood up to defend minorities in Canada and the rights of minorities to speak out, even if it irritates their home countries overseas.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
So, Mr. Doody, it's your turn.
Good evening, Prime Minister. It's John Doody. I'm counsel for the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. We've heard that Russia's foreign interference activities in foreign elections was the catalyst for the plan to protect Canada's democracy, and that Russia was a foreign nation that the Canadian government was concerned could potentially interfere in Canadian elections, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We've also heard from the site task force and the panel of 5 that neither identified any foreign interference activity by Russia in either the 2019 or the 21 general election. It would seem possible that Russia was not interested in interfering with Canadian elections in those years, or equally possible that they did and the Canadian government failed to detect it. Would you agree that it's possible that Russia interfered in one or both the elections and the Canadian government simply failed to notice it?
I would highlight that, of course, it is always possible that the entire body of our national security intelligence agencies are very sophisticated cyber and security communications establishment detected absolutely nothing or got it wrong. But I would also suggest that undermining Canadians' confidence in their elections being free and fair is probably something that Russia would love to see in Canada. So I would be very wary about saying that, oh, you know, despite the fact you didn't find any evidence of it, it still might have happened. I think we have seen the extent to which Russia is engaged in misinformation, disinformation, and actions of sowing chaos and destabilizing democracies around the world, including attempts at cyber attacks and successful cyber attacks in Canada. But I think one of the big differences between Russia and a number of other hostile or challenging state actors is the significant lack of a critical mass of either Russian diaspora or Russian speakers in Canada, as you contrast with the situation in Ukraine or in Latvia or elsewhere where there is an easier threshold for them to interfere in democratic processes.
You spoke about the need for Canadians to be confident that the government is doing what it can to keep Canadians safe. How confident are you in this site task force and the panel of 5's conclusion that Russia did not interfere with either election?
We know Russia is responsible for significant amounts of propaganda, of misinformation, of disinformation, and certainly attempts at interference are no doubt ongoing from Russia. They are a hostile actor, hostile to Canada, hostile to our values, hostile to our support of Ukraine, and hostile to our democracy. But to reach a threshold at which there is a belief that Russia posed a threat to the integrity of our elections, to the outcome of our elections, is certainly not something that either the site or the panel determined.
And finally, would you expect members of the Canadian-Ukrainian community to have a high level of confidence in that conclusion as well?
Yes, I think the Canadian-Ukrainian community, like all Canadians, can have a high degree of confidence in the conclusions by all of our national security experts and top public servants that the elections in 2019 and 2021 are free and fair. At the same time, I think Ukrainian Canadians, like all Canadians, need to remain vigilant to Russian disinformation and to the amplification of pro-Russian narratives in contexts and coming from places that one wouldn't suspect pro-Russian narratives to be amplified. I'm very pleased to see that Ukraine just passed the updated Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement over the past days, and I am continue to be bewildered at the fact that the Conservative Party voted against that update because they fell prey to pro-Russian narratives that are undermining Canada's support for Ukraine amongst Conservative Canadians, which I know is a thing of deep distress for many Ukrainian Canadians, and rightly so.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Metzirois for the RCDA. Russian Canadian Democratic Alliance.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. Hello, Madam Commissioner. I am representing the Russian Canadian Alliance. We have heard that some disinformation campaigns could have affected some political parties in the 2021 elections. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I want to remove politics about this, and I want to talk about disinformation. Mr. Trudeau, I want to indicate that the conclusion from our national security experts and the panel in charge of ensuring the integrity of our elections, well, they agreed that there was no impact in the results due to foreign interference, whether it's in the different counties or in the general elections at large. So yes, there were attempts to interfere, but our elections were, the integrity of our elections stood firm. Question. I want to ask if that kind of attempt affected just one party, or could it affect all parties, leaders of all parties, like the Liberal Party and the others? Answer. Well, the involvement of foreign interference can affect just one party, all parties, or a few parties. It can also affect the country of origin, the county, and the region as well. Question. Did you witness this as a leader of the Liberal parties during the 2021 and 2019 elections? Answer. In my capacity as a party leader, I was supposed to campaign, speak to as many Canadians as possible, and ensure that as many Liberal members are elected as possible. I was confident in the institutions that we had built, like the P5, to ensure that the integrity of the elections stood firm, and they concluded that in both elections, 2021 and 2019, these elections were free and fair. Question. Let's put aside the institution. I want to ask you this question as a party leader campaigning in 2019 and 2021. I want to know what you heard with your own eyes and heard with your own ears and saw with your own eyes. Did these attempts affect members of the Liberal parties during both campaigns? Answer. Well, disinformation campaigns were quite widespread, more in 2021 than in 2019. We saw conspiracy theories with respect to vaccination. We also witnessed conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum, and even personal attacks against me and my family. So yes, there was misinformation and disinformation during those campaigns. Question. Well, it can't be easy, especially when it affects your family. But my question is, you understand how social media works, so you did your campaign in 2015 thanks to social media. I'm sure it was very helpful in that campaign. I want to know whether were some disinformation campaigns that were more important, and do you think that they impacted voters during those two campaigns? Answer. Well, every political party was using social media to try and garner votes. So, of course, social media played an important role in those elections. Question, I was talking about disinformation campaigns, wondering if you know whether we can influence voters in that regard. Answer, I think we can see that disinformation and misinformation impacts several people. There are thousands of Canadians who believed that vaccination was more dangerous than COVID-19 itself. That is an example of people who were affected, sometimes fatally, by disinformation. Mr. Tira, you have a last question? This is my last question. I want to know if you witnessed disinformation that could, if you had witnessed this, why didn't you raise this issue with government institutions, those who are mandated and authorized to act on these misinformation and disinformation campaigns, especially when it affects the integrity of elections? Answer, because those institutions, and I speak regularly about this with my national security advisors, about the impact of misinformation and disinformation. We can see, let's remember the situation that happened with the convoys in Ottawa to understand that it's a real situation, but it's not up to me to tell the panels that you have to be wary of disinformation and misinformation. It's part of their job to ensure that the elections keep their integrity, and they did a good job in 2019 and 2021. And we understand that in 2025, it will be even more difficult, and they have to keep doing the excellent job.
One last question, if I may. If you, as the party leader, you're in an election campaign and you see serious interference, false information, would you report that? Is Elections Canada doing its work? I trust that they will do their work, but it is part of our responsibility, all of us, whether we're citizens, candidates, party leaders, or political parties. We all need to work with the site task force to report any misinformation or disinformation. And this is part of what we're going to do with the panel. We will raise issues with the panel, but the panel does not depend on us to do its work. But yes, absolutely, we can contribute, and we should. Thank you. The Attorney General.
Re-examination?
No, thank you, Commissioner.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, je ne sais pas si je dois dire que vous êtes...
Thank you very much. I don't know if I can say you are free to leave, but I will allow myself to tell you that you are free to leave. Thank you very much.
Order, please. Alors, s'il vous plaît, this sitting of the Foreign Interference Commission has adjourned. Cette séance de la Commission sur l'ingérence étrangère est levée.
Thanks for tuning in to Canada-wide news. Hold up, before you dash off. A little birdie tells me many of you are ghosting around here without joining the subscriber crew. Given Trudeau